Okay, well, let's have our questions first. I think we can take as long as we want, actually.
Can you react to Maxim?
Can I react to Maxim?
You kind of talk about the same thing for the
Actually, will you do this while I react to Maxim? You can field the questions.
Do what?
Field the questions, so I can sit here.
Do you want to take all the questions?
What do you mean?
Do you want to answer?
I want you to be the moderator. I'm going to respond. I'll answer your question now, but then you can take the questions, just so I don't have to do it. Yes, I mean, I completely sympathize with Maxim's analysis and comparison to the situation of you know, terror. Although you were mostly talking about post-revolutionary terror in the talk, actually, but I think in your abstract you were more interested in the situation like in the 1870s in Russia, this kind of the sense of being so far away from any kind of possible revolutionary situation that terror is the only way to mobilize people, but it's almost recognizing that it's impossible to mobilize them. Strangely resonant with Katie's idea of that art is always futile, so is true terrorism. But I don't know, I guess for me, I think they fit fine that kind of purely political analysis, you know, drawing on this Arendtian idea that violence is always pre-political and doesn't have real political potential. But I guess in my thing I was trying to emphasize more these formal characteristics of the Russian actionism that, you know, positioning it in a tradition and showing how I mean, in some ways art doesn't, and for me the political efficacy of art is not the first question. It might be like the third, fourth, or fifth question. For me what's interesting is to see through the art what is the society we live in, right? That the art, you know, it gives us access to a certain kind of you know, sense of where we are, and you know, in a long-term way of looking at it, or in a more specific, you know, feeling the event of, oh my God, yes, that's where we are. You can have it in either way. So I mean, it's true, but maybe it's not such a terrible thing that art has to rely on these shock tactics.
I guess it's like just two different perspectives, because this idea of like violence and mobilization, it also shows society which should give impulse.
Yeah.
So it's like two different perspectives. It's formal analysis and it's tradition. And so what's the question?
So why is a realist art, actually?
Yeah.
So for me, it was important to analyze them as a more like empirical way.
I have, thank you. Interesting. Also, the composition was quite interesting, with, in a way, very different perspectives on different subfields of Russian activism. I have two questions to John and one to Jody, or in between comment and question. Starting with the easy one, John, why didn't you? I mean, you made this integration of Wojna into the art history of the West. Why didn't you focus on the Russian legacy, like Greek or Brenner and Schultz and so on? Is there a certain
just time, and I figured most people here know that one better. So.
Okay,
but yeah, definitely. In the end, I was trying to think.
Yeah, if it would be kind of an article or whatever you make, I would say that would be a problem, in a way, a colonial perspective, even if the second one is more fundamental. That's a problem which is even connected to the censorship question. I think there does not need to be censorship when actionism is transformed in an academic format. I mean, and this is also self-critique, but because, for instance, I was struggling hard when I was writing this, for instance, this chapter about the Viennese actionism in the Art of Revolution, how to not represent but kind of actualize the transgressive power of these actions in the 60s. And with transgressive, I don't mean transgressive in your sense, in the sense of transgressive violence and so on, but transgressive sociality, which is a viral sociality, which really is the most dangerous towards the state. If you have the very proper points you make in an academic PowerPoint presentation, you might lose it. So this is more an open question, maybe you can reflect on that. And Julie, again about the viral question, I like the presentation about the practice of the Natural History Museum very much. My question is then, okay, it's a collective, better than Rea Fraser, but it's a kind of small collective, and my question is just how to make it in a part also an institutional practice, in the sense that it's an ongoing chain of events of instituting which also work as a virus and not have this close collective being what it is. For me, there is a wonderful example in Italy in the last years, the Teatri Occupati, the occupations of the theaters, but not only theaters, also Macau in Milan is visual arts, or also in Sale in Venezia. But there is a kind of viral effect of these occupations of art, but cultural workers occupying very different spaces, not only theaters. How to do it in other cases, for instance, in the very tricky situation in the USA.
Yeah. I don't know, I mean, that's the question in terms of how to avoid sterilizing everything as an academic. But I don't know. It comes up in everything that one does as an academic, especially working in the United States. But I don't know, I mean, I guess to try to be positive, as I've been trying to emphasize, we could say that, you know, participating in discussions like this one, trying in the various ways to you know, emphasize those moments that do take us a little bit outside of whatever that format is. You know, so when we had the beautiful scene of our three slightly not fully haired Russian men discussing Benjamin in a very kind of warm, but also potentially violent way. I don't know, or when Katie burst into Beethoven. These, you know, we have moments, I think, in these kind of discussions that allow us to forget that we are castrated. And I don't know, I think that, so, you know, Vaina didn't, you know, Vaina had a massive, you know, in the terms that you were using before, right? It didn't create a revolution, but it had a massive effect on sociality.
A negative one.
Yeah, you could decide how you want to interpret it. We don't know yet, right? Definitely, the feeling now is that we're glad they're wrong, right?
No, push it to suppress the revolt. It's as simple
sure,
as that.
sure, but this is, I mean, I think it's better to talk about it than to not talk about it.
So, Gerald, you asked how would this be, what would make this a constitutive practice, or in what way might it become a constitutive practice? Because it becomes a constitutive practice, or can become a constitutive practice, because it's seizing a common form. It doesn't just seize a specific museum. It doesn't rely on a specific space. it seizes a form and a set of representational strategies that are readily available, right? So just like the yellow and black was a symbol system that's readily available on all construction sites, just a completely clear set of symbols. This also takes a completely clear set of practices and takes them and makes them a part of a politics of the collective people against, climate oligarchs like David Koch. So I think that actually the constitutive practice is in the seizing of the generic, right? The seizing of an available state form. And I think that's a fairly exciting event, right? It doesn't claim, it's not spectacular, it's not a kind of one simple transgressive gesture, right? It's a politics of taking institutional forms and showing it's possible to do that.
Okay.
Well, I have a question, which is maybe a question to myself, which I cannot answer, but I would make such an inquiry. We have gone through a long story of activist practices since early 90s in Russia, and they have been different, and a huge history of activism in world art as well. And in here, I would make a differentiation between the self-exposure of transgression as against semantic recoding, interventionist recodification of social space, and which is really valuable in terms of activism, as against certain, hysterical self-exposure in despair, as against the power authorities, etc. And in connection of this, my question would be also, if I were Lipschitz, whether these practices, alongside with extreme courage of exposing and facing the power and countering, the sovereign, also contain a considerable extent, even psychoanalytically, of narcissism, of self-exposing narcissism, which is something that is counter self-resignation I'm talking about. This self-exposure, on the one hand, shows extreme courage and somehow teaches a lesson to the society, but on the other hand, doesn't it implement a foreclosure with the society, facing the sovereign? I am a magnetic sovereign facing you, the other sovereign, and constructs this blindness with the social space we talked about yesterday, when this courage, when this carnivalesque, self-exposing, transgressive, activist, and a bit narcissistic courage is not searching for self-reputation to see how the others are. So this would be my question. Not question, but a comment, because this cannot be answered.
Well, yeah, these are, I cut out the negative comments from my presentation, but these are obviously the things that one can say about the recent Russian actionist tradition, that it kind of tends towards a posture of glamour, even, Pavlinsky's beautiful photographs of these performances. There's, this glamorization of victimhood, in fact, and there's a real dissent even in the tradition if you from the, some people would welcome it saying, the early actionist Kulik and Brenner are all macho, and Weinland continues that kind of macho tradition, although I actually disagree with that interpretation of Weinland. But then finally we get a more feminine, more sort of, or even maybe degendered, at least definitely castrated Pavlinsky. And so it's a kind of loss of strength, a descent into kind of this despairing. But I guess what I was trying to emphasize in the talk, and maybe try to look at it a different way and fight that kind of mainstream interpretation, which is trying to just bury this stuff and say we're done with that. Let's move on into a condition where art does not take to the streets anymore. That's the consensus now, right? That period of Russian art history is over. But maybe if we look at it a slightly different way, where it's not actually trying to be transgressive, right? It has a transgressive response, but maybe that's a kind of wrong reaction to the work. I mean, it's a fair one, and it's definitely possible. But there's another way of looking at it, which is that the sovereign power is not sovereign, right? The sovereign power is actually is not watching all the time. And in that condition, we change as creatures. We lose our.
And then that such action is constructing sovereign power because
it's trying to
refers to the power as sovereign.
Well, I don't know. I mean, you can say that, but in some sense, it's trying to say like you act like you're sovereign power, but at the same time, you don't fulfill that role, right? So either fulfill it or just disappear completely, right? I mean, that's kind of the interpretation.
No, it's hysterical. I mean, it's the position of the hysteric. Oh, well, be a part
Yes,
of the power, be a part. Oh, you're not that. You're not.
But that's the first reading. You need to get to a second reading, I guess is all I'm trying to say. That yes, it's problematic, but that stuff comes out as soon as we start saying like, oh, look, it didn't work out, it was wrong. But there's another level to these works that maybe, I don't know, maybe it was more accessible at the time and people have forgotten it. I'm not sure. I mean, why was it so inspiring? Was everyone just in a fit of hysteria, 5 years ago?
Was it inspiring for whom?
Well, at the time, there were a lot of people who were inspired by it, and we definitely were participating. All the hundreds of people that participated in Banana actions in various ways. I mean, yeah. So there's a position that the real audience was only the police themselves, and they actually like this work because it actually works for them. If they wake up and they get to do something that's kind of exciting. But I don't know.
Mike, do you have?
I think just a comment. Well, Banana groups were not made for the primary audience of people, also made for people who happen to be there that night, but actually by now, if I have a correct source, it comes from war, of course, and it's a war with the media, and also how the image is spread in the media. So it's created as an image which is supposed to spread, and it's not art that it's going to be exhibited. It's a gallery. And they also were saying we are not interested in exhibiting. And in this sense, it's an extremely interesting phenomenon, and not just for 15 people, but I think for thousands of people, it has become a fact in art history, I would say already, by this very strategy. But just a footnote. But I wanted to refer to Jody Dean and the Natural History Museum. And I happened to be in New York in 2011 and participated or went with the action of Occupy Museum to another natural history museum in Upper West Side, to the dinosaur wing, and they were exactly doing an action in the dinosaur wing against Koch, because he's sponsoring this wing and he's saying that climate change is not human-made, etc. So, I mean, are you somehow relating to how Occupy Museum was working in the Natural History Museum? And if yes, how? And second question is that yesterday you were questioning this artist as organizer idea. In the Tahrir Square, or Occupy, the artist has this pretension of calling herself or himself as an organizer. But when I see this presentation, I also very much see your collective as a kind of, also a self-organization within the museum. You are very much organizers, so this is different discourse or appropriation of the public there. So how do you relate to that?
So first, non-alternative participated in a little bit of Occupy museums, but not kind of hugely. In part because non-alternative doesn't make kind of art occupations one of its primary goals. And the difference between the Natural History Museum and the occupation of the American Natural History Museum is we've just started a new one. We started a brand new museum, the Natural History Museum, as a way to not let, let's say, David Koch define the space. Not let David Koch be the one who's determining, oh, this is what's counting as the exhibit. Instead, we define the space. We are counting what counts. We are showing the possibility of a museum of the future that takes the collective as its source. So I think the primary difference is one of terrain and concept, right? Do you conceive of the museum as something that's kind of static and then we go into it? Or do you say, oh, no, we can own the very concept, we can own these forms. Those are things that we can now do things with. So that answers the first question. And the second question on artist as organizer, I guess I probably was too quick yesterday. I think the kind of problem is that as I saw it when I read Yates McHugh's version of it talking about Occupy Wall Street, is it was a little bit too heroic and less, and it didn't have enough of a kind of collective, anonymous feature to it, right? With the Natural History Museum, I mean, all of the people, everyone has sort of T-shirts and hats and things that make them all look the same, right? And one of the things that we think is important is this kind of anonymity, right? Where there's not individuals who appear as such, or who are going to be like the heroic organizer, where it's all going to be kind of flattened out into this institutional form that in fact actually is part of the necessity of it having an instituent power or constituent. We can talk about those details later. But because anyone can be in it, just like with the Anonymous Mask or the Pussy Riot Mask, anyone can be doing this. And it's the same thing, right? It doesn't require in any way some kind of heroic narcissism. And in fact, it really refuses that.
Also questions for Jody and for John. So, first for Jody, I was reminded of some of the works that developed in the framework of kind of a tactical media sphere and so on. And how do you relate to those kind of appropriation of the power position on the part of the groups like the SMN or Grodentude or Atlas Group and so on? And for John, I was thinking, obviously I was also thinking the same lines as Katie with Termark, but then I started thinking about the differentiation that we can also make between this self-flagellation type of works that you basically put forward from the 60s and 70s in the framework of the Western art history, and then the works of Moina, where I don't see any of that kind of self-flagellating mode of expressing the kind of diagnostic potential of art, because then you would again succumb to this idea that art indeed is a mirror, not a hammer, right? So I think there is a difference there, and that Moina very often, at least in my mind, performs publicly or attaches kind of a public weight to performing the kind of excess of that jouissance, of that pleasure, of something that is not performable, right? So it seems to me to be quite the opposite pole from the examples that you have. And then related to that as well is the question of translatability of these practices abroad or international. So maybe we can expand on that, because it's very interesting what happened with translation of a lot of these projects in the international context through the media.
Thanks for the question. So I'll answer it with respect to the difference between what Not an Alternative does and the Yes Men. The Yes Men first operate ironically primarily, right? Their actions tend to be kind of funny, but almost always ironic. Not an Alternative has a militant sincerity. Right? Everything is completely, it's not meant to be ironic at all. It's really true and really sincere all the way through. Additionally, the Yes Men will take a given feature that we know about, let's say, the horrible status of the food that McDonald's uses and the way that it wants to cheapen the food supply, and then they exaggerate that point. What Not an Alternative does is find an excluded point and bring that out. So, as I mentioned with the current climate politics, the options apocalypticism, you know, and catastrophism on the one side, and then the kind of techno-utopian on the other side. And what is excluded from that is a collective, basically collective politics as a move where we can change the shape of the world that we live in. So non-alternative has a pretty different aesthetic strategy and a different political strategy of what's important. And so we sincerely find something that's important and excluded by the dominant framing and bring that out. Finally, non-alternative works 99% of the time with ongoing activist groups and campaigns. So whether or not that's like the social movement unfolding with Occupy Wall Street or with Occupy Our Homes, or now with the different mobilizations going around climate politics, particularly with the People's Climate March on Sunday. So there's a specific tie to groups that are actual activist social practice rather than primarily a kind of art practice.
It seems that the Occupy movement, in that sense, like if you think about the tactical media that appeared in that particular moment of history, and then after the Occupy movement, that this kind of practice needs to go back to the ground, so to say, to go back into the realm of the physical institutions and that kind of operative structure of the already existing institutions, right?
Yeah,
this kind of grounding is.
I think that's right. I think that's it is very much that kind of back in the institutions, see how you can use them, see how you can seize them, and given that they're falling apart, this is not that hard to do.
The question for me, of course, is another one of these things where I just didn't take the time to establish why people often make that kind of comparison. Kind of just assumed it, but in a longer thing, I would have to obviously go through that. But of course, I was emphasizing the differences myself, right? And not the similarities. But in terms of the Vaina, of course, that's the main difference that I was also trying to talk about, right? Is that instead of this situation of stripping the this image of a human being of all actual affect and emotion, while this supposedly transgressive gesture is taking place, such that you don't get that feeling, right? They're doing something really kind of intense, but it's as if it's not intense, right? It's kind of similar to what Artyom was talking about as the strategy of the Soviet writer Platonov, as a kind of not defamiliarization, right? Instead of taking something normal and showing it as shocking, you take something shocking and you show it as normal. So basically, if the discussion is about looking at all of these different works in the context of the question of transgression, the question of violence, and a distinction that I like to make between a kind of sacrificial violence that still does have that transgressive potential and something that's more associated with these analyses of bare life and so on, of simple extermination, right? That's a violence that where the blood doesn't flow, basically, right? Where it coagulates. So for me, both of these traditions are actually moving in that direction, right? Away from a transgressive violence towards a violence that cannot produce the transgressive quality. What's different about the Russian one is that for some reason it actually does anyway. But for me, again, if you look at the works closely, that is not actually what they're trying to do. That maybe the artists themselves say that's what we're trying to do, but the actual complexity of the artworks for me is there's clearly something else going on, and what that is this specific situation of being in that sort of post-sacrificial condition and enjoying it. In a strange way. And this is something that in my longer analysis of this is inherited from the late socialist period, when you have this kind of situation where power is just simply, it's a bunch of 85-year-old guys who can't even speak. And there's a huge, tremendous amount of space in society where you can do whatever the hell you want. For example, you can go into the woods and beat yourself up and pretend that you're gay, even if you're not gay, or decide whatever you're pretending you're doing, and all sorts of strange practices that should be considered transgressive, but instead it's just a kind of fun that has this weird quality of being performative without again, similar to the not being able to produce transgression, performative without recognizing it as a performance, which is this excellent Russian practice of still. So, I don't know.
Thank you. Well, Jonathan, I wanted to ask if you had thought at all about the example of AIDS activist kind of performances, especially in light of your kind of category of bare life as stage enjoyment, and not just because of the parallels with David Weinrich, for example, with the cell phone mouth, or the simultaneous performance of pleasure with the kind of the kisses, with a dominant, manipulator. But even more, I wondered if you look into the transformation of political funerals where the actual agency of a particular activist was exercised posthumously, in the sense of those actions where people's ashes were thrown, like at the White House lawn. And it's, of course, that's another kind of transgression because it's illegal in the United States it's against federal law to throw someone's ass, whether they want to or not. Anyway, there's some interesting, I think, maybe it's too vague, but it's not just multiplying the examples, but an interesting way to think through some of the connections between 60s, 70s, and this 80s, 90s period.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that I haven't looked into, so I can't really produce the argument. But it's definitely. I think you're definitely right that that's something that I should look at. And there's also, in terms of this category of skill that I was using, probably the closest thing to it in English actually is camp. So there's, I think in those kind of artworks that do something very similar in terms of this thing that I'm talking about of being between performance and not performance, irony and seriousness and so on. But yeah, so definitely it's something I'll look into adding to this.
You can translate. If I speak Russian, will it be okay? Можно, да?
I'll do it in an old-fashioned way. The issue of Vojna and of the report that we have been hearing, I have some doubts about the methodology, because when we compare actionism in the 70s that were made by artists, people belonging to art and who had a position in the world of art, and when we compare them to the Putin era actionism art that has a very complex and I would say even vague relation whether it's art or not. There is one simple definition, and I insist on it for a long time. I think there is a simple word, tactical media. People use media. Tactical media. This term was coined in Holland by Harold Ludwig and other. This term is well known, and it describes perfectly the phenomena we're talking about. These are not even public action art. This is the first thing I wanted to say, because we should read these performances in the logic of media, because not only they circulate as media, but they are customized, they're tailor-made to circulate in media, and that's why their influence should be valued differently. I understand that you wanted to focus on violence and transgression. Of course, Vojna group is a perfect example, but it is weird for me to hear that there is enjoyment, jouissance, because Vojna is a transgression. Because when people came who fucked up everything, and this is why Vojna is a series of scandals, when the fragile, when very vulnerable activism environment has been in a terrible conflict all the time, and this conflict is still going on. When Oleg is walking with an axe and beats Italian activists. So what can we constitute really? We don't have any chance of influencing power. Because Pussy Riot didn't have strategy. This is all about tactics. Or maybe this strategy or these tactics, when the Biennale team were saying that, okay, what are we doing? We try to eliminate Putin from the power position. So here we see the combination of tactics and strategy, and I really think that this is a big problem for Russian activism, for the 90s as well. This is a clash of individualities who don't constitute anything, but the only thing they do, they expose their narcissistic ego. So the only thing that we can evaluate is their media popularity and how many clicks they got. After Pussy Riot, we understand that analyzing the media, Vojna group, they do exist. But that's the only thing that they have. I think that these issues should be thought upon and they need another approach. Thank you.
Maxim, do you want to answer the question about is it art or is it just media? Maybe because that's part of what you were talking about too.
Well, it's a difficult question. It's a complex question. Because, I mean, judging from what I heard from the people I communicated with, it's not art, the way they see it. We may call it tactical media because many of them, they do have this message that, you know, we are exposing what has been secret, what has been unseen. I mean, judging from their position, it's more about tactics. And I think Dima is right in calling it tactical media. The way you view it, I mean, it's your choice. I can only, you know, witness what I've heard and what I've seen. And Gerald has written a book in various ways of activism, you know, functioning during different, fusing with different things.
I don't know. For me, I mean, Dima, everything he said is true. Basically, you took this general kind of criticism that a lot of people have been making and pushed it as far as you possibly can, saying all sorts of ridiculous things at the same time, as you love to do. But you know, for me, the question of you know, is it art? First of all, maybe that's an old-fashioned question that isn't necessarily relevant. In this case, but at the same time, you know, these kind of I don't know. It's a very old-fashioned question, but for me, I think if you're going to take an old-fashioned approach to this, then you should definitely say that it is art, because you can read it that way, right, and you can experience it that way. And I think that, of course, you know, Vorotnikov always was talking about it in terms of art, in sort of, and you know, they give lectures now and academicize it themselves, and we can criticize all this stuff as well. But so, I mean, in any case, for me, that's not the crucial question. Again, to say that they came and fucked everything up is, of course, true from one particular political perspective, right? But you have to also understand there's another tradition there's an older tradition of you know, political activity in Russia that goes back to the late Soviet period, that flourished in the early 90s, that was extremely popular here, that often can be described as crypto-fascist in different ways, that does not assume the posture that we welcome as westernizers of clear categories that make sense to us, that function in a clearly efficient political way that we recognize as having been tried before. There's something different, and part of what I'm interested in about this is precisely, it's not, not to be colonializing or orientalizing or anything, but to see that there's a specific context here. And I think maybe what's fucked up about Russian politics is the fact that there's always, except in moments when, I think precisely when these actions were happening, there was a kind of excitement that was associated with the where you could have these kinds of things, and the liberal politics of the protest movements of 2011 and 2012. You could have these things happen at the same time.
I wanted to reflect on this great criminal that we identify artists with. I mean, Benjamin's great criminal that we identify artists with in the current situation. This figure of a great criminal, as Benjamin and Derrida describe, it's ambivalent. It has an ambivalent nature, characteristic ambivalency. A society, to this or that extent, would sympathize with this great criminal. We saw it in your report when you talked about the reaction towards the Vojna actions or Pavlensky's actions. But at the same, Benjamin speaks of the moment when this crowd, which destroys this great criminal, and Benjamin sees it as an act of divine and fair violence. So you have this ambivalence. In this sense, I want to ask, or maybe comment, the theorist, I myself being a theorist and working with activist art, has not to go too far into this academic sphere, because we can't reduce ourselves to academic level. Among artists as well as among politicians, you see this war, undeclared war going on. I don't want to dramatize, but we are part of this drama, and therefore all our arguments about Vojna or Pussy Riot or any kind of activism or actionism, they're all potential expert opinions in court. They can be counted as expert opinions pronounced in court, which means we can't play innocent, academic innocence, as if we're neutral. It's as if we're, assessing their, parties in war and their tactics. But not to be carried away too much by theory. I mean, when theories are imposed, when you impose certain criteria on theory, we should say that when we evaluate, we can assess an action as positive or negative. But it should be. If you want to produce an expert opinion that this is not art, you should understand what kind of art you're talking about. If art were if art was an excuse not to send someone to prison, then you could have said that what Pussy Riot does is art. But if we talk about criticism of those actions that act as reactionary acts or influence certain processes, I don't see any limits or limitations that would prevent me from expressing my opinion, even if it makes you part of a camp, part of a party which is against their actions. На такие вещи, конечно, сложно отвечать. надо подумать. Are still kind of uncomfortable just to be shown in academic context, and it makes me very happy. And I'm also happy that many scientists and art critics and are still discussing it as if it happened yesterday. There's still no consensus, or at least about what Vojna group is about. And I would especially like to emphasize the fact that what Igor has been, talking about. Of course, you can and you should discuss everything in the freest possible manner. Otherwise, why are we here? But the truth is, Vojna set up certain ethical categories that later infiltrated or were extended over the protest. Why are we talking about, criminals, about trials? We're in the same situation as Vojna. We're in a situation of protest which is not finished, which has lost, and a lot of criminal cases are still running. I mean, there's a lot of people are still on trial. We should fight. We should keep struggling. We should keep talking freely about these things. And yesterday we talked about it. Brenner was a moralist, and Vojna was a moralist. They set up certain criteria for this discussion. It's a comment, it's not a question.
I think we have to let our translators go home. They're working really hard. We love them. So tomorrow we start at 11.